Stick or twist? What are some of the big selection decisions facing Steve Borthwick as England move forward into the rest of the Six Nations? 3 tough games coming up after 2 wins where they've won, maybe haven't set the place alight in the way many people would have hoped for, and some big name players coming back into contention for selection. So welcome back to the channel. That's what I'm chatting about in this video. Leave a comment. What do you make of this England team at the moment in terms of what you've seen so far, and where do you think Steve Borthwick needs to go in terms of selection, and in particular to the names I'm going to talk about in this video about the players that are back in training with the squad after brushing off some of their injuries. Make sure you like the video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well. But as I say, welcome back. Also, apologies for the last couple of days with not having uploaded onto the channel. I think the last video I did would have been following Ireland, Italy on Sunday. The reason for that is I am in Australia visiting family. So a couple of days rest, well, basically a day traveling, a day's rest, and we're back into it. And I will do my best to keep the content coming throughout the Six Nations. Because even though I'm the other side of the world, the news cycle, all that around the Six Nations does not stop one bit. So as I say, welcome back. And as I said, some big names coming back for England. Some very, very interesting ones. So Luke Cowan-Dickie is back in. Jamie Blamire is out. Manu Tuilagi is back in. Still no Ollie Lawrence. He is with the squad, but he's going through rehab. And George Martin is in. Tom Pearson is out. And Marcus Smith is also, same as Ollie Lawrence, still with the squad, but kind of rehabbing the injury you wouldn't imagine in contention for selection at the moment. Those are the bulk of things that I'm talking around in this video. And I want to start with Manu Tuilagi. Does Tuilagi come straight back in? And I don't mean this in the way that English rugby for years has had this thing of having to get Manu into the team, trying to fit him in any way they possibly can. I don't think Manu Tuilagi's form has been as good as we've seen it previously. He's obviously had a lot of issues with injury. But I think the way in which England have played to start this Six Nations, as encouraging it has been from a defensive point of view and an attacking point of view in regards to what they're trying to do and where they're trying to get to, I think that midfield with George Ford, Fraser Dingwall, Henry Slade, which they were kind of forced into really with Tuilagi, and actually more than Tuilagi, Ollie Lawrence, who has been in such good form for Bath, being injured, they were forced into a smaller midfield. And on the whole, actually, I think generally they've done pretty well. I do think it is an area, particularly the Italy game and the Wales game, those 2 matches we've seen so far, that opposition attacks have looked to exploit. And I think have had some success in that, in getting themselves on the front foot against this England defensive system. Because quite simply, Fraser Dingwall and George Ford in particular, if you're looking at the 10-12 channel and some of the bodies in forwards or inside centres that teams are sending down that channel, they're just not the biggest men in the world. So there's going to be times where if it's just those 2 in the tackle, teams are able to get on the front foot against England. And I think we've seen that a couple of times. I think we would see it in even more when we're looking ahead to the next games. Scotland away, Ireland at home, France away, some of the inside centres they have, some of the players they have in that pack. That will be an area that will get targeted, which is a long-winded way of me saying, do you bring Manu Tuilagi back in? Because it changes the complexion of that team, in particular from that defensive point of view. It's a tough one. As I've said already, it has been something that has held English rugby back in some ways, the reliance on Manu Tuilagi for such a long time. But I do think it's quite lightweight, that midfield, with how it is at the moment. Bringing Tuilagi back in solves some of those issues. I suppose on the flip side of that, the way in which England have attacked, how much of that has been down to the fact that they haven't had an Ollie Lawrence or a Manu Tuilagi? The way in which they've moved it more, they've looked to spread the ball wider, earlier and more consistently than we've seen them do at the World Cup or previously over the last year with Steve Borthwick as the head coach. If Manu Tuilagi's back in, would we see the attacking shape maybe alter as well? It's really, really interesting. I would be inclined towards bringing Manu back in because of that thing I've mentioned of it being a lightweight midfield and having 3 really tough games coming up. I would rather it is Ollie Lawrence because his form for Bath has just been exceptional, one of the form centres in the Premiership. But as it's Tuilagi as the option, I can understand why he is the guy that you would bring back in. But let me know what you make of that in the comments. Elsewhere, Luke Cowan-Dickie. It's an interesting one, Luke Cowan-Dickie. So he first of all, he's a good experienced option for England because hook has been an issue for a while. Jamie George, obviously, now as the captain, will always be starting, but he would have been starting anyway. He had to get through a lot of minutes at the World Cup. Theo Dan was the guy coming off the bench, but the disparity in experience just meant that Jamie George has been relied upon for doing a lot of the bulk work. And I really like what Theo Dan has done and the player that he could turn into. I think there are still areas of his game that need to develop. So do you bring Luke Cowan-Dickie back in? Again, going back to the fact of the 3 tough games you've got coming up, to have someone with, I think it's over 40 caps for Cowan-Dickie, coming back into the team as a replacement. What a great option to have coming off the bench away at Scotland, at Murrayfield. Or do you stick with Theo Dan? I'd be tempted actually on this occasion to stick with Theo Dan, more because Cowan-Dickie has had such a torrid time with injuries and serious injuries in terms of that neck area. Hasn't played a huge amount of rugby, that I would be tempted to stick with Theo Dan. It's actually a really good example of, overall, I think it's a good thing that the Premiership doesn't happen now when the Six Nations is on, because a lot of people stop paying attention, the Six Nations just dwarfs it, and the competition is weaker when you don't have all the internationals. Luke Cowan-Dickie is a really good example of how we could do with more competitive domestic rugby happening at this time for someone that is returning from injury in this way. But for the time being, personally, I'd stick with Theo Dan, but let me know if you disagree. The last one is a fascinating one because George Martin is back. We know Steve Borthwick loves him. We know that in that World Cup semi-final when he came in, he was absolutely outstanding. And I think because of those things, he does come back into this team. But the question is going to be where. And really, it's he can play in the second row or he can play in the back row at 6. And actually, despite the absence of Courtney Lawes, quite quickly, you look at the blindside options for England. Ethan Roots has been really good so far coming in, man of the match or player of the match against Italy. Chandler Cunningham South has looked excellent coming off the bench, and there's lots of people that look at him and think he's the long-term successor to Courtney Lawes, as actually starting at 6 for England. And now you've got George Martin. So what do? Do you say, bring George Martin into the team as a kind of number 6, in which case he either starts and that maybe pushes Ethan Roots to the bench or Chandler Cunningham South drops out? Or do you start him on the bench, so Ethan Roots the one that starts, or Chandler Cunningham South starts, but George Martin has that bench spot? Or do you incorporate him into your selection for second rows? Maritoje and Ollie Chessum, the second row so far, Alex Coles coming off the bench. To me, my gut instinct is that seems more likely, that George Martin maybe comes onto the bench for Coles, and he's then that second row option who can obviously play 6 as well. And because Ethan Roots and Cunningham South have been going so well in the early days of their international career, you stick with them and you keep letting them gain that experience. That would be my gut instinct for how Steve Borthwick tries to work these players in. So I'm saying Luke Cowan-Dickie for the time being, you let him continue his recovery, maybe training with the team. I think Tuilagi comes back in because of what he brings to that midfield, in particular in a defensive set, in terms of where some of the frailties I think might be at the moment. And I think George Martin maybe comes onto the bench as a second row option rather than a 6. But who knows? That's just my gut instinct. Let me know what you make of it. As I said at the start of the video as well, Marcus Smith and Ollie Lawrence continue their rehabbing. Lawrence is just a massive miss for England because of the form he's in and what he would bring to that midfield. So hopefully he's back soon. Marcus Smith is less of a loss, I think, purely because of the options at fly half in George Ford and Finn Smith. But I think to me it looks like George Ford's going to be the guy, isn't he? I think George Ford starts at fly half if he's fit every game of this Six Nations now for England. And Finn Smith gets the experience coming off the bench, which is the pragmatic, sensible approach. I can completely understand why they're going with it. Before the tournament, I said that I'd like to see Finn Smith start, but I'll be honest, I can understand why Borthwick is going in that direction. It does make a huge amount of sense. So what do England do? Do they stick or twist? An unchanged team for the game against Wales, the first time that was the case since the 2019 World Cup final. I think we will see changes for the Scotland game, going away to Murrayfield, somewhere that England have not had a good set of results over the last few years, a rivalry that has flipped 180 from the days of England dominating it to now Finn Russell, Gregor Townsend, this group of Scotland players who are not intimidated by England one bit. They have had the upper hand in the Calcutta Cup over the last few years. I think with some of those players that are now available to Borthwick, we will see changes in this team. I look forward to reading your comments. Make sure you like the video and make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well to not miss anything I'll see you in the next one.